vacancy costs can really escalate and get out of control. There's an uncertainty in not having a tenant, which creates stress.
That's the number one reason that we see that people move out. They never fix things. Over and over and over again, tenant complaints. It's been broken for weeks. It's been broken for months.
We don't want to evict people. We don't want to chase people for rent. We want to make sure that everybody is going to be fully verified.
You're putting all of these notices on their door and they've done nothing wrong. These aren't eviction notices.
Yeah.
These are just what's required by law now. Hello and welcome to another episode of the SJA Podcast. I'm Devin Easterlin, CEO at SJA Property Management, and I'm really thrilled to have one of our most experienced property managers on the call today, Jenny Rosen. Jenny, how are you doing?
I'm great, Devin. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent, and we are
Good.
recording this a day before Thanksgiving, so a little quieter around the office, although you were just sharing with me you have a few fires to handle right now before everyone goes on break, so appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So
Wonderful.
lots to be grateful for, right?
Yes, lots to be grateful for. Absolutely, that's the spirit.
Yeah.
Well, I thought we could talk today about tenant retention. This is a hot topic, especially in the investing world, as to when do you raise rates? How important is it to keep a tenant? Is it more important to make sure that you're always increasing your rent, always looking for, maximum returns? And I know that you have a ton of experience and have done really well with tenant retention and have a lot of good reasons as to why you take the approach that you do and why we do that here at SJA as well. So I thought we could just start by talking about the cost of losing a tenant and how an investor should be thinking about retention versus going out and raising rents maybe to as high as they can potentially.
Absolutely. That is one of the most important functions of the management agreement, is keeping the property occupied. So thinking about renewals, you want to just anticipate what it would mean if the tenants don't renew. So obviously the cost of vacant days on the market where you're not getting any rent. If you factor in also turn costs, maintenance, what you need to move somebody in, the uncertainty with the market these days, that there can be some volatility with the rents. So you really are going to have to think about it in terms of the big picture and how you can retain a good tenant for as long as possible. So vacancy costs can really escalate and get out of control. And there's an uncertainty in not having a tenant, which creates stress. And so one of the things that we strive to do is to maintain a consistent and stable environment. So that means keeping good tenants, keeping owners happy, while also balancing the need to increase rents when expenses increase. So it is a fine line. Typically, retaining a tenant and executing a renewal is usually the best option, with some exceptions.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said there about, the idea of having a low stress environment for the owners. And that's something, at SJA that we tell is we're going to take the stress out of owning property, out of owning investment property. So they can be very passive and we'll do all the proactive work on that. But part of that is not having that stress of a vacancy. And I think what I see from my desk is owners not necessarily factoring in how big of an impact vacancy is. So say if you have 1 month of vacancy, that's 8% of your gross rent for that year. Well, that is in a best case scenario. So say you choose to raise the rent on a tenant that's paying on time, that is keeping the property in great condition, and we say that an owner really wants us to raise the maximum amount of rent. Well, if that tenant now moves out, you're going to get at least a month, probably 2 months of vacancy when you factor in the time it takes to turn the property, get a new tenant, and when they actually start paying rent. We might be able to get a lease signed before that, but when they move in and actually start receiving income. And I think another aspect that people may not be thinking about is every time you bring a new tenant in, you're running a risk that this might not be the perfect tenant for you. And if you had a tenant that was keeping the property in great condition, paying on time, really easy to work with, allowing us to get in to do our maintenance, that is gold. And you want to keep that as long as you possibly can. And now you're running the risk that this tenant may not be as cooperative or may not be as prompt with rent payments and all of that. So that's another sort of hidden cost with that. You also bring overturning the unit. And this is one that I see as well, as especially with owners that maybe are less experienced. They think all the turn costs will be shouldered by the prior tenant. Can you tell me a little bit about how that operates?
Yes, wherever possible, you will charge a tenant for tenant-related damage. But one of the things that we are experts in is knowing what the law states we're allowed to
Yeah.
charge for. We can't charge for everything anymore. There were massive changes to the tenant law back in after COVID that changed the charges that were permitted to assign to outgoing tenants. So a lot of these turn costs are going to be shouldered by the owners, and we have to sort of strike that balance and let the owners know this is what we can charge and this is what we can't. So if when you add in new tenants have an adjustment period, and they're going to start looking around going, wait a minute, what about this and what about this and what about this? And that's kind of normal for a new tenant to kind of walk through and expect things are going to be all perfect. They're not necessarily going to be perfect, but there is an adjustment period where you start getting maintenance at the very beginning of a tenancy. So even after you've turned the property, you've moved somebody in, you're still going to have some more expenses. So
Yeah.
you can factor that in along with rekeying the property. That's also required by law. And just the general new tenant orientation does bring in some additional costs.
Yeah, absolutely. We've always had the standard here in Washington State of normal wear and tear. I think that
Mhm.
standard has been heightened on the side of the tenant. Now we're required to break down hours, time, and labor. You no longer can just say in the lease that all the carpets are going to be cleaned. You have to show that they were actually stained. And so, really, what I'm getting at is the tenants are allowed for a lot of normal wear and tear, which an owner is going to have to shoulder. I'm thinking about painting the unit. That's one where there might be smudges and things like that. But under the way the law is written and applied, those may not be able to be charged back to the prior tenant if there wasn't specific damage. Also, with
Yes.
carpet cleaning, you're going to want to refresh your lawn. There's a lot that goes into keeping a property well maintained, and that is shouldered by the owner. A lot of that, maybe exterior siding, things like that. So
Yeah.
when thinking about that, you mentioned what a new tenant is going to want when they move in. I think this is a great segue. If we're talking about having quality tenants and keeping those quality tenants, how do we get a quality tenant in the first place? There are so many properties out there. There's only so many wonderful tenants, a lot of them, but how do you attract those to your properties? How do you think about that?
Well, you have to have the property that's move-in ready. So we pay a lot of attention to leasing, advertising, and making sure that our properties look great when people come and view them. We have, a pretty streamlined process for screening tenants, reaching out to every lead, screening them and make sure that they qualify. And we're pretty specific about what we need. So, we don't want to evict people. We don't want to chase people for rent. We want to make sure that everybody is going to be fully verified. So we do that. And sometimes it's a big picture approach. Sometimes, you need to call previous landlords. Sometimes you need to put together a situation with rental history or getting a cosigner, checking
Mm.
the credit score. So each applicant is really viewed, on its own, and just in terms of getting the best fit for the owner.
Yeah.
Especially with great properties that a lot of people want. It is tough. There is a lot of competition, but we want the best fit, the best return for the owner. So we take a lot of time at that.
Yes, I know that's a huge thing for us. We're always saying here that SJA properties rent faster. It means anyone can apply our methodology, but one thing that we want is we want the property to look really good online. That's where everybody's seeing property nowadays. Is they're seeing it on Zillow, seeing it on HotPads, they're seeing it on all these various sites. So we want it all over the internet. We want really quality photos. I think that's something that maybe if you're managing your own property, make sure you have really quality photos because everyone can see the listings where there are not quality. Maybe there's a picture of the toilet with the toilet seat up or something in the background or it's fuzzy. The best tenants are going to want a property that is move-in ready, like you mentioned. And also, I think they really want it to be well managed, either whether that's by the homeowner or by a property management company. They want the experience to be good. And the first impression is really, really important. So a few tips that we use here at SJA for what we think about what is move-in ready. When we have a person coming and look at a property, we want to make sure that it's hotel clean. And everyone knows what a really clean hotel room feels like. And that's what you want your property to feel like. You want also everything functioning as designed. That's another thing. If a tenant walks through and things aren't working properly, they know that, oh, wait, this is just the beginning, right? Exactly. They want to make sure, hotel cleaned, functioning as designed. I like to make sure that the carpets have all been cleaned, the paint looks nice and fresh. They feel like this is a fresh start and they can move in and call it home, not something that's temporary, something that can be their home. And if you have a property that doesn't meet all those standards, you might get a tenant in a pinch that needs to move somewhere. But as soon as they get an opportunity to move out, they're going to move out, right? And we're trying to find those long-term, stable tenants, the cream of the crop. And that means our properties have to be the cream of the crop. And I'm not talking about that they all need to be luxury. Yeah, we have a few luxury properties out there. They just need to meet the criteria, be move-in ready, and really show well to those tenants.
Yes, definitely presenting the property in the best possible light. And if it's, if it's an older property that doesn't have everything brand new, that's okay, as long as it's clean, nothing's broken. So that's how we're presenting ourselves to the leads and following up with each prospect that's a good fit.
Yep. So, I think that's also, you mentioned follow-up a couple times, and that's something I see people miss on also is we're looking at everybody that's inquired. I know you go through all the leads that we receive from any tenant and you're coming back and you're saying, hey, how was the showing? Is there any more questions I can ask? Really being that squeaky wheel to stay top of mind, especially as the market slows when we get into times like this. It's Thanksgiving tomorrow. It's a slower time of year, which means you have less amount of leads coming in, less amount of tenants looking. It doesn't mean properties don't rent. It just means you've got to really work those leads, help them to see your property and stay in front of them. So that's a great point there as well. Well, wonderful. I want to talk a little bit about, so now we have identified that we want how to get the best possible tenants. You talked a little bit about screening, which of course is so important. Everyone needs to do that. And if you can't do it yourself, you can always hire a company. Say if you don't have a property management company, you can hire someone like RHA. There's other screening companies, but definitely recommend that. You need to have a screening process that is thorough and also keeps you in line with fair housing and equal protection laws. So once you've done that, move them in. Of course, there is a process to moving them in a way that both leaves a great impression with your residents and also protects our owners on the back end. And that is taking a lot of photos, making sure everything is well documented. The tenant understands how to use the home, and we know the condition is very clear, and they're receiving copies of that. All those documents have been signed. We like to do a few other things. I mean, these are the basics, and I'm sure most of people listening to this understand that. We do a few other things to make that tenant experience really top-notch. I know we offer the ability to move in directly to the house. They don't have to come into the office. That's a big one. We're putting tenant gift baskets out of a lot of our properties, and that's just a few things to make their move-in a little more enjoyable. Maybe a roll of toilet paper, some various snacks, things like that, because they are moving. They're moving into their new home, and we want it to be a great first experience. So moving on to while a tenant is in the property, how do you ensure that they're having a good, positive experience? And we talked a little bit about this before the call, is if the tenant's happy and they really enjoying their home, that leads to the best possible results for our owners. So how do we keep those tenants really happy and living in our properties?
Well, you start with making a true connection with each individual that moves in. And I think when you establish that rapport, tenants feel comfortable and safe with you. So we do that. We have, as you mentioned, we have all these features. We have virtual key appointments. We spend a lot of time on the front end before tenants move in. So they know their team, they know their property manager, they know the assistant that they're going to be dealing with, and they know exactly how to request repairs, how to make payments. So you've gone through all the steps and you're giving them information and telling them, hold on to this, keep this. We're giving you a lockbox. Keep your lockbox. Put it under your sink. That way, if you need maintenance, you can put up the lockbox. We're giving them details that they can refer back to. We stay in touch with them by means of, letting them know about notices that we get from the owners or from HOAs. So we're always in touch with them in that way. We do regular property evaluations, and that's actually an opportunity for tenants to let us know about maintenance issues. So we take the report, we fulfill, the maintenance requests that they're putting in. So we're always in touch with them in some form, and they know who we are. So there's this consistency there. We do have a maintenance team, which is kind of unique. Each property has a maintenance coordinator, and they are able to put in their own requests. So they have control over that and direct contact with the vendors, with the maintenance team for repairs. So overall, big picture, we don't want to be in everybody's lives all the time, like in their business, but we're there for them. So that's one way to keep people happy and more inclined to renew. Not everybody is going to renew, but one of the things that I found in my team is that the people who are moving out, they're buying houses. They're moving out saying, I'm relocating. It was great. We loved being here. We have tenants staying 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and they're finally able to save and buy a house. So we wish them well. They move on, and then we turn the property. But we have a lot of consistency with the tenants that we have in our team. So I'm proud of that, and we care about them. So we care about the tenants, we care about the owners, and I think people know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really great points, Jenny. I think that last one that you touched on is that caring. And I would think about this, we talk about this a lot at our all hands meetings, is mutual respect with all of our tenants. We want to earn their respect and make sure that they feel respected by us as well. I know that tenants, especially now, they really want things to be very convenient, and they want to be, if they have an issue, it's a big deal. Say a maintenance issue in their home, their refrigerator goes out, the heat stops. This is a big situation in their lives, and it's causing a lot of stress. There's probably family members, and everyone is expecting results very quickly. And though we manage, over 2,000 tenants, in our various properties, we need to make sure they all feel as though we've got them. We're very prompt in responding. We empathize with their situation. We act quickly to make sure that vendors are out there. Our vendors are always licensed and insured. They know how to enter our property. We feel comfortable with them going into an occupied property. And those tenants get updates as to how things are going. Maintenance is a huge issue, or a huge thing that you have to get right in property management, especially from the tenant's perspective. That's the number one reason that we see that people move out. They never fix things. And you can just over and over and over again, tenant complaints from, say, other management companies, or maybe people that aren't putting enough time and effort into managing. It's been broken for weeks, it's been broken for months. And if you can stay on top of that, it's really a win-win. Yes, there's some cost to repair, but the law requires us to do it anyway. And it makes that tenant happier. So the faster that we can do that, their tenant satisfaction increases, which increases the chances that they don't want to move out at the term, which, like we talked about at the beginning, increases the owner's return. And by the way, it helps preserve the value of the property, right? A property that is move-in ready, very good condition, and we are on top of all the maintenance. That tenant is also more apt to keep it in good condition. And that's another thing. There's a mentality shift there. When we're really making a big deal about keeping it in pristine condition, they feel that as well. And they also, want to keep that going. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I also love that, I think all managers and people that are self-managing need to do these periodic walkthroughs of the property. And it's not a way to, maybe enforce lease provisions, although we are looking to make sure there's no authorized pets, things like that. But really, it's a time to connect with your tenant. How's it going? What might need to be done? Are you seeing anything? Because not all tenants are really versed in maintenance, and they might not notice a water spot where there's a bathroom above, right? Where we can see that and we can say, wow, we need to take care of that right away. Or they might not notice missing grout where water could be seeping behind the shower. And so we can help them. You can also ask them if, hey, what's going on with the property? Are you seeing any issues? How are the neighbors? Is there anything we can help you with? Again, they're feeling like we care, which we do. And it's a win-win for the owner because we're preventing any potential bigger issues from escalating.
Yes. It's also can be an opportunity to just notice how tenants are treating the home. Sometimes, you don't want this situation, but occasionally you do an evaluation and you just discover things. And, after sending to the owner, you may decide that's not someone that you want to renew. It's unfortunate, but that does happen. So having eyes on the property is important for both owner and tenant.
Yeah.
Right?
It also it's more timely to do it, say 6 months in than, and we've had owners, as you know, that have transferred to our company and they haven't been in the property in years.
Yes.
The tenants just keep paying, the tenants keep paying. And then we go out to that property and we find so many issues that there's a reason the tenants don't say anything. It's because they have extra occupants in there, or there's they installed their own garbage disposal and it's not working properly. And they have direct TVs, directly on their roof shingles and it's causing a leak. I mean, there's so many things that you have to keep eyes on. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. This one's a hot button topic here, and this is pricing. So when we're thinking about, we have a tenant in place, and provided this is a good tenant, meaning when we did our walkthrough, everything checked out, there's the tenants aren't in default, we want to renew to this tenant. How do you think about price adjustments? Just to give an example, say that we're under market. How would you approach pricing for an in-place tenant?
Well, when you have a property that's under market, ideally the owner does want to increase the rent, but we have rent caps now, and we also have to balance keeping a tenant maybe a little under market versus the vacancy situation that we talked about earlier. So my approach has always been, relatively smaller increases at renewal, and incrementally over time you may be able to approach the market, but you have to take in the big picture. One of the things that I like to do is present an increase to the owner. We can present to the tenant and we can negotiate. So I actually encourage tenants to reach out. I don't want them to just give their notice and move out because the increase is too high. I want them to reach out and say, hey, you know what? Can we come to an agreement? And I have a lot of tenants that will reach out and say, can we split that increase? Can we split that, 5% to 2.5% or whatever it is. So we encourage that versus, turning the tenant off, increasing the rent to beyond what their budget will allow, and then having a vacancy, which we know is going to be costly. So that's always been my recommendation is to keep a good tenant.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah. And I think, what I hear from that is it's really property specific. It's so property by property, we need to be taking an individual approach. So if your property is well under market, because there are rent caps, you don't want to get so far behind that if you go to sell, you're not going to get the full value of that property because your rents are so low. So say, you own a fourplex and rents are 25% below market. Well, any potential buyer is going to say, well, we're leaving a lot of money on the table and it's going to take me years to get caught up to what market is. Yes. And so the way we think about it is you have to look at it from a property by property perspective, see how close you are to market, make sure you understand your time of year, the risk that you are running, and then you can make a personal assessment as to, is a small increase warranted? Say if you're close, I would recommend a small increase. And like you mentioned, over time, so you're keeping up with the market, but yet you're not going so high as to cause a vacancy. And I love what you said right there, Jenny, that makes a lot of sense for me, is that you're keeping this a negotiation in your mind, not a take it or leave it.
Yes.
In the tenant's mind, so that it's not necessarily saying, hey, I'm going to give you this rent increase. You can negotiate it if you want. That's not what we're saying. We're saying, hey, let's keep the lines of communication open. This is what the owner needs based on, increased taxes, increased maintenance expense, blah, blah, blah. A lot of residents will say, okay, that seems fair to me and let's move forward. But what we don't want is to hear crickets, because while we have to start a lot earlier in our renewal process, a tenant can wait till, a month before the lease expires to give their answer. And
Yes.
you could find that, hey, that you find out if someone's not in communication with them, oh, wow, they gave their notice to terminate. Now we only have, say, 20 days to turn this property, find a new tenant, figure out what needs to be done. And it really puts the owners in a bad position. So I love what you said there about having that open lines of communication and coming and keeping the owner's best interest at heart, but at the same time understanding that the owner's best interest is keeping a very quality tenant, right? And making sure that they can, I talk about this all the time, but is our job as property managers, or even if I'm managing myself, is to put the most amount of money in my owner's pockets over the long term.
Yes.
And what's going to do that? Well, controlling vacancy is the biggest lever that we have as property managers or self-managers. Our average clients are saying 6 to 8 years. I was looking the other day. So this is a long-term partnership, and we have to be thinking of the long-term benefits for our owners and then educating them on why we're taking the approaches that we're taking.
Yes, and one of the things that we now with the regulations in Washington, we do have to give ample notice for certain
Yeah.
cities. In the case of Seattle and some other cities, depending on your increase, you're talking about 6 months, 180 days notice. So we're starting very early. We're starting the conversation. We're also required to serve notices to tenants, and we're in communication with them. So we give them a heads up. Hey, we're going to deliver a letter to your door. Don't be alarmed. This is part of the state requirement. So that starts the conversation. Oh, what's that about? My rent's going up. And so you're having a dialogue. And you can also get an idea if tenants are going to renew or not. Hey, you planning to renew? Yeah, I am, or this is my concern. And that begins the conversation rather than just sending out a document, having it sit there, and then getting a notice to vacate. We don't want that. We want to keep tenants if we like them.
Yeah. And you mentioned the new law changes now. If for those of you that aren't familiar, definitely bone up on all the rules and the posting requirements and how far out you need to start that process, especially if you're raising rents. There's a whole bunch of rules and regulations that you need to navigate. One that you mentioned is the new posting requirement, where you're putting, if there's multiple occupants in a home, you're putting all of these notices on their door, and they've done nothing wrong. These aren't eviction notices. These are just what's required by law now to make sure that these tenants are properly informed according to our legislation. And if you haven't talked to them about that, that's going to be a shock. Say they're in an apartment community, a condo community, and their door now has all of these notices on top of it. So that's something new that we've had to navigate. And of course, the cities have different timelines. So we're dealing with different timelines for different cities. Typically, you'll find that Seattle is the most restrictive for owners, giving tenants the most latitude that we found. But definitely make sure there's a lot of great resources out there for people that want more information. We have some information on our website about it. Also, you can go to RHA's website. They have some good guidelines on how you need to post and serve notices for rent increases and all of that. It also now is harder to remove a tenant that you need what they call a just cause to remove a tenant that is in a property. And so there's a certain amount of rules associated, reasons why a owner could remove a tenant, but it's a lot harder than it used to be.
Yes. And those laws keep changing. So you really have to stay on top of them. We understand everything that's gone on this year with HB 1217, which is the rent cap. Most landlords are familiar with that this year, but there are other restrictions that are going to be taking place in the future, right?
Yep, absolutely. It's just part of being a landlord, especially if you're doing it on your own, staying abreast of all the changes. And one thing that is maybe interesting to people that I've talked to that that come to our company is, well, I have a lease. Do those lease terms still apply? And I would say, well, not necessarily. So when the laws change, they supersede any lease that you might have written and the rules that you have in that lease. So you have to go back and amend or follow the law rather than the lease. That can be a little bit tricky for sure.
Yes.
So just something to keep in mind.
Yes.
Well, wonderful, Jenny. I think we've really gone over it in pretty good detail, the importance of keeping those quality tenants and how that relates back to a positive owner experience, like you mentioned, keeping it as stress-free as possible. It's a win-win. The residents get a great home, they feel cared for, respected, the owners get to be the best return on their investment possible, also while keeping it well maintained. So it really works out well if you take this approach.
Agreed. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for taking some time out of your day to chat with me. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, you and everyone, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks, Devin. Bye now.
See you, Jenny.